Ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Patrick Henningsen. This is the Sunday Wire. It is January 11th, 2015. Get your tea brewed, get your coffee ready, get yourself situated, because our next guest, we're going to go into some of the more deeper aspects of the Paris attacks and how it fits into the context of what's going on in France right now, what's going on in Europe, and also globally and geopolitically, and also historically. And we will talk about things like Operation Gladio in detail. But firstly, we're going to talk about the event itself. I'm going to welcome on our next guest. He's an investigative journalist, and he's also a radio host. He's based in Bristol, in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom. His name is Tony Gosling. Many of you will be familiar with his work, and he's also a regular commentator on a number of channels, including RT. Tony, are you there?
Yeah, hi, Patrick. Yeah, us investigative journalists are a bit of a endangered species. If people have seen the Sidney Pollack film, they'll get the reference. I think it's called The 3 Days of the Condor. And you know, there really has been really ever since the 1990s when the British documentary makers at Yorkshire Television, a documentary series called First Tuesday, which was a national series on ITV here, they started to dig into the paedophile scandals to do with the Republican Party, the Franklin scandal, this kind of thing. And
that documentary, that was that aired on TV? Because I saw
it was never aired, but you see,
it was incredible.
Ever since that was produced. In fact, the guy just lives quite close to me. I'm quite happy to put you in touch with him if you want. Tim Tate, the producer of that film, said that it was just amazing the way that the whole British investigative documentary scene collapsed around him after they made that film. It was quite clear that the criminal elite, the power elite, however you want to put them, decided, right, we're going to close down investigative journalism, certainly in broadcast investigative journalism in Britain, because there's no way we're going to allow this kind of thing to be aired on television. They've made it for the Discovery Channel. Discovery Channel paid $500,000 for the making of the film. It's called Conspiracy of Silence. You can watch it online. And it's absolutely damning about the use of paedophilia in the elite circles, basically to blackmail our politicians. So most of the politicians that get to the very top, in one way or other, have been totally compromised and are owned by somebody else. I mean, I think it's still absolutely important to engage in politics and vote and that kind of thing, but don't be under any illusions that the people at the very top of the political parties are actually going to be acting in our interest, because most of them, I think, are scared. And that lack of investigative journalism, I mean, he described it as a very delicate infrastructure of investigative journalism was just dismantled in the early mid-1990s here in Britain. Of course, bang on time for 9/11, and no investigative journalism, proper investigative journalism, is done by mainstream media, financed by them at all nowadays. It's just window dressing of one sort or another.
Yeah, and in fact, if anybody gets tired of the seriousness of this particular topic and you want to have a little comic relief, I'll be on Crosstalk on RT today, talking exactly what Tony has just been talking about, which is the farce, which is the mainstream media, and talking about some other lighter subjects like the North Korean Sony hack hoax and the interview and so forth. But
well, it's worth saying, Patrick, that the Russians are tiptoeing around this one in Paris. It's quite clear. Yeah. They don't want to go wading in at the deep end, and they haven't been, for example, asking people like me to comment who know quite a lot about these kind of false flag events that have been going on in Europe over the last 30, 40, really ever since the Second World War. And I suppose that the one person really needs to get up for putting people like you and I in the picture is the Peruvian-born US filmmaker Alan Frankovich. I mean, he made the three-part documentary series which went out on the BBC back in 1992, 1993, the Time Watch programme, which went deeply into Operation Gladio in a way that also scared the criminal elite, scared the power elite, and was another reason why from the mid-1990s onwards there was a real quite slow strangulation of investigative journalism, even series that here in the UK that were pulling in 10 million viewers. You would think the advertisers might be interested in that and the network, but no. No, it's all going to be closed down because there is going to be no more investigative journalism of that kind of sort, with teams of sort of 10, 12, 14, plus a barrister working constantly on being the eyes and the ears of the public and effectively a sort of last court of appeal for all of the awful machinations of the establishment to get the word out. And just simply, that doesn't happen nowadays. So it's left to people like you and I. And it's really quite heartening to see the way that quite a lot of people have been pulling together on the internet to pull this whole thing apart, because there are literally thousands, tens of thousands of people, particularly those in Paris today, who went along to a demonstration thinking that what they were doing was standing side by side with the victims of this horrific attack in Paris, but actually found that, lo and behold, all the world leaders were leading them. And, they basically hijacked this. Some of the biggest terrorists on the planet have actually decided, Benjamin Netanyahu, David Cameron, and, the whole thing was turned into a Mahmoud Abbas, Netanyahu. Well, those of you who've come out on the streets of Paris to show solidarity with Charlie Hebdo, that you're also basically saying, well, this is all part of the Middle Eastern peace effort, and David Cameron and Netanyahu are leading it. I mean, this is horrific stuff, and it's a hijacking kind of psyop, I think, of literally tens of thousands of people. Now, I'm not saying that Cameron shouldn't go to something like that. All I'm saying is that if you look at the coverage of it, it's been given them a platform for their views and it's extremely Orwellian. I mean, I've never seen anything quite so peculiar as an anti-terror march where you've got the biggest terrorists on the planet leading it.
Well put, Tony. I was just watching before the show. I was watching this on CNN, and I have never in my life seen such a dazzling display of propaganda. I mean, the first Gulf War, second Gulf War, Iraq War was impressive. The Yugoslavian War, that was an impressive display of propaganda. But this is is a whole lot more sophisticated and multidimensional.
Which and you know what? It's bad journalism, because the biggest terrorist attack by far was the attack in 2011 by the Freemason terrorist Anders Breivik, who went around murdering in Norway. And actually, the number of people he killed is actually quite considerably more than those who were killed in Paris and the London bombings put together. And yet, when we have the coverage here on our so-called wonderful Channel 4 News on British TV here, Simon Israel, their correspondent, security correspondent, actually completely failed to mention that attack. And he said, the biggest attack in Western Europe since 7/7. No, Simon Israel. Sorry, mate. Actually, the biggest attack by far was the Breivik attack done by a Freemason Zionist. And actually, there's a really good article by Torstein Vidal. If you come across Torstein's work, he was actually right next to his window. I think I'm right in saying one of his windows was blown out by the bomb in Oslo that the Breivik planted. He wrote a really good book saying, well, actually what Breivik's doing is, and an article too, is equating Zionism with Nazism, and he's a big fan of it all. He's a Knights Templar and he's a Mason. And there's been no real looking into the Masonic lodges that Breivik was involved in. Obviously a perfect place to hide a crime. Everyone's sworn to secrecy on pain of death. And this has been completely missed out from any of the coverage. Unbelievable, really.
Yeah, Anders Breivik, we must be reminded of the severity and scope of that event. And you're right, Tony, that has been completely expunged.
It's also very much in the heart of Western Europe. Actually, Scandinavia is in Western Europe, if you have a look on the maps. Reminding our friend Simon Israel on Channel 4 News. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. And it's the same sort of attack as happened the other week, which was considered very horrific. I mean, it is obviously horrific. The Peshawar school children were murdered. So the idea is to go for the opposition's children. Now, what we're doing here is it's not soldiers fighting soldiers, is it? It's soldiers killing kids. And we're in a whole new world, a cyber war, this kind of asymmetric warfare, and also, of course, propaganda warfare, which is what we've seen today in Paris.
Yes, and speaking of propaganda, I'm going to play you something, Tony. This is a CNN clip. So, Brian, if you're listening, cue up. Get ready. I'll call it out in a minute, but don't play it. But get it ready. It's the Fear CNN for Muslim sleepers clip, CNN number 4. And so this is when they've basically refashioned. It's a running narrative that changes, like Microsoft updates every 15 minutes. They put a new patch in. I'm going to play you one of the patches from yesterday that CNN was running. And basically, yesterday they were saying that new sleeper cells have been activated. Oh, hold on. I'll do my impression of Jim Scahudo, CNN's national security correspondent. Hold on. We've just got an update, breaking update. Sleeper cells have been activated. This is from one of our sources in French security services. This was told to us by our French affiliate. Yes, Muslim sleeper cells have been activated, and it's on high alert. There could be other attacks, could happen at any minute, and so forth. Okay, now they're saying this under the same breath, Tony. They're saying this, and then they show a picture of Netanyahu coming through the hallway saying, and Benjamin Netanyahu is coming to Paris. He's on his way now to be here for the event on Sunday, which is today. And then they say Cameron's coming. So what they've done cleverly, Tony, is they've created this danger scenario. Then they show the world leaders who seem to be bucking danger. In other words, in the face of danger, our world leaders are still coming to Paris. So to me, there's no danger at all, because why would you send all your world leaders if it's on high terror alert and then amass 20 or 30,000 or a million people in one place? So play that clip, Brian, real quick.
I saw in today's New York Times an estimate of 1,000 to 2,000. So the point is that is a very large number. And as you've been reporting, Jim, over the last couple of days, I mean, for each one, in the tier 1 case of these suspects, I mean, you have 20 individuals that would need to monitor a particular individual. So you do the math. I mean, it's just an extraordinary number of people that you would need to follow around people who are deemed to be dangerous because of this very large group of people who've gone to Syria, including, it seems, perhaps now the girlfriend of. In the tier 1 case of these suspects, I mean, you have to
attackers there are out there. Sense it lines of 5,000 text, Charlie. So mimicking that now very popular internet hashtag Je suis Charlie, I am the magazine saying the city of Paris is. Peter, I wonder if you can help put this latest terror warning into context for our viewers. I was told, for instance, in the last 48 hours by a former head of France's counter-terror services that there are something along the lines of 5,000 suspected terrorists in France. If you have this warning going out of sleeper cells activated, can you give a sense of how big that threat would be? How many sleeper cells? Do we just not know? Is it unlikely that even the French authorities know how many potential attackers there are out there tonight?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen varying estimates of the number of people, for instance, who've gone to Syria from France. It is the largest group of Westerners who've traveled to the Syrian.
Okay. So Tony, they said how many terrorists are out there? How many sleeper cells are there? Instead of asking the question, are there actually any sleeper cells at all?
Well, look, it ain't journalism. Whatever you could say, just literally taking what the police and security services are telling you and presenting it as fact. Look, first of all, I mean, if I'm dealing with the police and security services, I want named sources, yeah? Come on, let's have the Director General of the Security Service put his name to what's being said. That's just absolutely basic stuff. And what's been happening over the years, this is just to give people a bit of an insight into how this stuff works, is that over the years, the major correspondents from the London mainstream media are played off against each other. So if they play ball with the security services, they get all the choice stories and they give out the anonymous quotes as fact, that kind of thing. They get the good stories. That's people like the Murdoch Times, and the BBC. And if they don't, then they just simply don't get the stories. When the security services have got a story, they will only talk to their favoured. So they're playing off one network against another. And over the years, they've whittled away the networks and the newspapers' will to actually question anything that they say. I mean, you can't believe this is just exactly what George Orwell's talking about, really. And that's the method behind the scenes by which the military, to a certain extent, but I mean, the operational military, I think, is another issue compared to the psychological warfare people and the military intelligence, because they are actually rather more sceptical than most of us about what the news media is telling us. I can tell you that certainly most of the military people I know are after the Iraq business and the weapons of mass destruction. Anything that they see on the news or hear from military intelligence, they say, well, where's the evidence? Come on, before we risk our lives, we want the evidence now. And this is one of the sea changes that Iraq has brought about, thank God, at least a little bit in our armed forces. So there is a tremendous amount of reliance on what those guys are saying. But this is mostly. I mean, we're in a situation now where there's almost no witnesses left. They were all mown down one way or another on Friday, and so the official story stands. Whatever the anonymous officials from the French security services, internal security services, have told the press is happened. That is, in other words, including things like the identities of people who've been shot, the identities of people who were at the Charlie Hebdo place and filmed at the Charlie Hebdo place. We have really no way of knowing anything about whether they're saying what they're saying is true. We just have to take it all on trust, and there's going to be no trials, it seems, none at all. So no evidence will have to be presented, and really this is just ruled by media as a adjunct of the military intelligence, which in itself has been completely co-opted by the military-industrial complex, as good old Eisenhower warned us, it would do. The timing of all of this, though, Patrick, I think is one of the things which have annoyed me more than anything else that hasn't been discussed at all in the mainstream press, and that is extraordinary that we had back in, you roll back to October last year, we had a attack on the Canadian Parliament with guys who were, it seems, a little bit, should we say, a bit like Kurt Haskell's guy, on the fringes of society, possibly, with mental issues, that kind of stuff. Exactly the same time as the Canadian Parliament was considering its attitude to the NATO actions, which NATO, of course, is supposed to be some kind of consensual organisation where everyone agrees. But at the same time as Canadian politicians were deciding their attitude towards the whole NATO moves against ISIS. Then we had in December a similar kind of event in Sydney, again at the same time as the Australian Parliament was considering whether to go along with the NATO moves. One of the bits of news I just heard today, I don't know if you picked this one up, is that at least one of the hostages in Sydney was actually shot dead by police and security services, not by the hostage taker guy there, who, by the way, was. I mean, I don't know if you saw the article in the one of the Sydney papers saying that there were 10 different things that the Australian security services did wrong, including giving the guy a gun license.
Oh, they gave him a gun license.
You have to laugh, really, because if you wouldn't try. That this is this is exactly the sort of stuff that nowadays is normal. So what you've got is these guys, these nutters of one sort or another, are being handled by radical preachers, often who are working for the security services, have been compromised, or simply just love the job. They think it's a bit of a laugh. They're having a joke. But the people who are their victims, who fall for this stuff and who become these crazies, lone crazies, end up dead. So there's no way of connecting them back to the people that have been handling them from security services or private military, whoever it is. And so then you get an event at the right time, which is, it's literally like a kind of sheepdog mentality, and it scares the public, it scares the political classes and the press just at the right time to take the right decision. It's Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, isn't it? I mean, she has done a fantastic job, I think, in really breaking that down, and even the short little film she made shows you exactly what they're up to, which is a way to control literally millions of people through the media at the right place at the right time, you can get exactly what you want out of them. And there ain't no question of democracy, I'm afraid, with all this. It's just simply what the power elite want. And what they want right now is they want to up the stakes to get as many Western powers behind the NATO actions in the Middle East. And, of course, this is also a way of getting everybody behind the actions against the Russians, because it's bringing everybody together into the military fold and actually saying, well, actually, you need, and I'm not talking just about the public, I'm talking about the politicians, particularly the people that make those decisions for us about policy, into the hands of NATO, into the hands of the military, and it puts them in charge. You know, if you're under attack, you need to go to the strong guy and ask him what to do. Absolutely.
It's just, that is the sort of the bigger theme. That's the bigger theme that we're looking at. You're absolutely right. If you're getting bullied in your neighborhood, you either go to your local mob boss or you go to the police. Someone's going to give you protection, basically. And in the case of NATO, this is a kind of multinational, transnational protection racket. That's the only way I can really describe it.
Well, I'd also point out, Patrick, that, you know, I was flicking through a book years ago and it came across, I was just literally sat there gobsmacked looking at it, because there was a picture of Paul Hauser. Now, Paul Hauser, he was SS general on the Eastern Front, Panzer Corps general during this World War II. But more interestingly, he became the head of the HIAG organisation, or Odessa, which is the SS Veterans Association after the war. In fact, he was helped by the Americans, as it explains in the Frankovich Operation Gladio film that was made for the BBC I mentioned before, as actually having free rein after World War II to basically go around and handle and run and help former SS people who were being protected by the Americans and the Brits on the the West Germany, basically. And his statement was pretty shocking, which was that the first meetings of NATO were carried out by the international supporters of the SS. And there was quite a big movement, I think, at the end of World War II. General Patton was very vocal about it, saying, well, actually, now we need to go and take on the Russians. So the idea was that some of the units that hadn't been disarmed of the Nazi forces could join forces with the Americans and the British and then go for the real enemy, which was the Soviet Union, and the Soviet armies. But, of course, that didn't happen, and I think that there's still that wish to do it. And the question arises, why this obsession with Soviet Russia and Russia, and the answer is pretty damn simple, I think, which is that what the Russians were doing, and still are, on communism generally, one of the things that they do is that they break up the monopolies. When you've got a water monopoly, electricity monopoly, oil monopoly, car monopoly, these big corporations that are doing so well now and avoiding tax all over the Western world, whilst the poor and starving people are actually having to pay tax. I mean, we've got the situation where people with no money have bailiffs knocking on the door telling them you've got to pay your tax, whilst these, you've got a horrific situation. So, it's those people who are really afraid of just the idea of left-wing stuff, and communism represents that the communists will not have a great plot to take over the world, but actually what they want to do is they want to break up these massive, powerful monopolies that are in the hands of private families in order to share things out a bit more. And that was the big fear. And that's why the CIA's biggest operation, political operation in history, was in Italy, when the Italian government looked like it was going to bring the communists into a coalition. Now, then that was when Aldo Moro was kidnapped and killed as part of the Operation Gladio by the Brits and the Americans working together with the P2 Lodge in Italy. Basically what we were doing, we were running a secret government that every time that the people started to go towards the left-wing side and becoming a little bit friendly towards the communists, basically they would just kill the people involved or kidnap them. And they were running the Red Brigades, basically the so-called left-wing extremists were being handled and run by Operation Gladio, by the P2 Masonic Lodge in Italy. And that sort of stuff happened in Germany too, with the Baader-Meinhof gang. And actually, getting back a little bit closer to France and Paris, during the 1980s, mid-1980s, there was terrorist training going on in Belgium, as we've heard, funnily enough, just last year in the Ardennes region. They had jihadi training camps, apparently, posing as paintball sessions actually in the Ardennes region of Belgium. And one of the things that happened, one of the immediate things that I pointed out about this thing is in Paris, is that we had police being killed by US Marines in Belgium back in the 1980s because the US Marines were parachuted in as part of Operation Gladio, went into a police station, killed police, and stole guns. And what they did is they try and make the whole thing look like a left-wing terror group. And so when the massacres had happened in the supermarkets and the bit of money had been taken to make it look like that the country was under attack by left-wing terrorists, so these Marines and probably SAS people too, the Gladio operatives, these fascist right-wing soldiers, under the command of NATO intelligence and the Club of Bern, the Club de Bern they call it from Switzerland, what they did is they then planted those weapons that they'd stolen from the Belgian police in some left-wing squat and then left. So the idea was that there was a sort of trail left to make it look like there was a whole kind of left-wing terror. And you know what? The Belgian people and the Belgian government fell for it because at the time there was a political thing going on where the Belgians were talking about getting rid of US influence and US cruise missiles. They quite rightly said, well, look, why should we have American nuclear weapons based in Belgium? It just makes us a target. And so they were about to vote to remove them. And these massacres happened at the same time. And the Belgian parliament said, oh, well, we'd be better keep our American nukes then.
Well, that brings us to another similar point here, Tony. And you talked about Anders Breivik and the Norwegian massacre. That has something in common. Those chain of events have something in common with Paris, because Norway at the time had made a move to ostracize Israel just prior to that shooting. I think it might have been something related to the BDS type movement.
Well, it was. I mean, the kids that were shot were actually part of the growing boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign against the Israelis. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And some of the kids killed were some of them prime movers in Norway in that campaign, and
the children of movers and shakers as well in that country, and they were wiped off the map, as it were, to use an Israeli bit of terminology there. But then only in November, Tony, French Parliament announced that it is likely to vote to recognize a Palestinian state, and of course they did in December. But Benjamin Netanyahu issued a warning in November saying that would be a grave mistake on the part of the French Parliament if they did such a thing. And that warning echoes. It's harrowing right now in my head, looking at what has just happened here in Paris. And I'm not being conspiratorial. I'm just looking at the Norwegian situation, the move against Israel, then the massacre. Then I'm looking at the move against Israel, then the massacre. And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's not maybe exclusively Israeli. I mean, I know the intelligence services, and you can comment on this, do subcontract out work to each other and do have sort of common interests between transnational partners. But that, to me, I see it that as a strong possibility here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's also well worth looking at the sort of, if you want, spiritual, if you can call it that, connection between these three main powers that have been really, the leading this so-called peace march today. The three biggest terrorists on the planet, basically, Netanyahu and Cameron. I mean, I know Obama's there, but isn't there? But he would be if he, in spirit, if he could be. So these three nations, what they're doing is they are, the real serious terrorist threat at the moment is coming from these drones. The idea. And we've just had the CIA torture report, haven't we, of course, and Marine Le Pen, the nationalist leader in France, just before Christmas was saying, this is appalling, we want nothing to do with NATO, and this is another side of all of this, is that you've got the French attitude to NATO has been very, very sensible over the decades. 1966, Charles de Gaulle, who the US CIA tried to assassinate. There's the Day of the Jackal, I think the film is. I don't know if you've seen that one, Patrick, have you?
Yeah, that's the original. The original, yeah.
It's a horrific film.
Yeah.
And quite rightly, the Americans, the French said, well, we don't want anything to do with NATO, thank you very much, and they left in 1966. And it was only under Sarkozy that they rejoined in 2009. But this club, NATO, is like the Hotel California, isn't it? Yeah. you're never allowed to leave it. Sorry.
Yeah.
And there was so the idea that Marine Le Pen was putting forward before Christmas. Well, that's all gone now, and you're really in the coalition, and you've got to be part of this international community because we're facing this dreadful fear. And so that's I think quite an important angle on all of this. That that you were saying, that there was essentially a warning going out before Christmas. Come on, you French, you've got to get into line, and if you don't, something might happen. And of course, now it has.
Yeah, and also you brought up a point about this big kumbaya. Everybody join hands this Sunday and in our fight to get behind the pornographers at Charlie Hebdo. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say it as I see it, but and to join hands in defiance of terrorism and to celebrate our freedoms and etc. Now, the media is, Tony, what is amazing about this, and this is the most obvious thing that I picked up that probably went over some people's heads, but I see all of the CNN anchors are out there. All of the media are there. There's hundreds of thousands of people in French out there, and they're all getting together. The celebrities have arrived. The world leaders have arrived, and they've just organized this thing, this snap rally. They've got millions of dollars of printing of vinyl banners and truss rigs set up with staging areas and so forth. Now, and the media is out there covering every single aspect of this gathering, of this protest or rally or whatever you want to call it. Now, and they're saying, the world has come together, and they've got satellite events in other cities, and they're saying how wonderful, this has never happened. This is unprecedented. Well, let me tell you something. This is what I'm going to say to Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper and Christina Amanpour, who's one of the top propagandists in the world. I've seen her shine this week. I was out there in 2003 with 2 million people in London protesting on the eve of the Iraq War. And I did not see, the media did not cover that. There were simultaneous marches all around the world. That is unprecedented.
I think it's a psyop, basically.
They ignored that. They didn't come to cover it. They downplayed it.
I mean, this current one is psychological warfare officers, I think, have been involved in preparing for example, the hashtag, the banners, this kind of thing. And if say Francois Hollande, or say, let's just take it a little bit further. Benjamin Netanyahu had gone on to French television and said, well, please everybody come down to the Arc de Triomphe on Sunday. I think you'd probably find only maybe a quarter, a fifth or whatever of the people would actually be there.
Yes.
What's happened is a kind of trickery, is that, yes, everyone wants to, of course, it's a horrific attack. And, these cartoonists, wherever you think that they're a pornographer or whatever, there's certainly no excuse for storming in there and murdering these people.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely disgusting act. But it's been hijacked. It's just simple. And it's the way that this has been done in a sort of premeditated trickery that I find so appalling. Now, back in the Second World War, I'm a big fan of the author Dennis Wheatley. He was what they called back in World War II in Whitehall here a deception planner. There is now a massive industry around that. I mean, what he did, for example, was he made the Germans think that the British and the Americans were going to come across at Calais at D-Day. And so the Germans put a fantastic amount of effort into defending Calais and all their top divisions down there. And he used things like inflatable tanks. It's quite well known, this. But what there is now around this is a whole massive industry, and it's stretched out not just from the military right into the media. I remember when one of the MI5 officers back in the 1990s, David Shaler and Annie Machon, blew the whistle on the MI6 funding the Jihadis in Libya to try and kill Colonel Gaddafi. Because, this is a whole other aspect of this, isn't it? You've got Operation Cyclone and Charlie Wilson's War. We rewatched that last night just for the hell of it. What a fantastic film that is, an educational film that gives you an idea of just how close the Americans and the Brits have been to the entire jihadi thing. In fact, they funded it. It's like a giant kind of corporation that they've funded covertly and created this thing out of nothing. There were a few mujahideen with a few Lee Enfield rifles in Afghanistan, and now they've got all the top kit, they've got all the money. Look at ISIS, man. I mean, they are an incredible organisation. They've got drug rings, they're selling drugs.
They've got a PR department, marketing department, social media department.
They've got one of the top LA people doing all their PR. Listen, they could close down ISIS tomorrow if there was a will. But of course, they need the enemy. They've created this enemy, and that's actually what's at the back of this. What all of this is about making sure that there's a coalition together to fight ISIS, because of course they're not giving up on Syria. Syria is, they really want to take Syria out, and of course this could be the spark of a third world war, the Russians are backing the Syrians, and they've said to them, no, you're not having it, and there's going to be quite a tussle over that country. Also the other thing that's been going on at the same time is we were talking about the timing and things to do with the Palestinians, etc., and we've also had this French aircraft carrier now moving into help with the attacks on ISIS, and
Absolutely.
This is very important. That hasn't been mentioned in the press. Oh yes, very, very handy that the French are now absolutely on board. It's pretty amazing that so important context can be missed out. The other thing is this whole jihadi thing. We've heard that one of the preachers that was an inspiration to these brothers, the Karachi brothers in Paris, who is supposedly behind all this, he was a frequenter of Finsbury Park Mosque. Well, you know what that means to me in North London? It means MI6, because the guys at Finsbury Park Mosque, and I've met one or two of them over the years, they were saying, well, back about 2002, 2003, we were phoning up the police saying, will you please get these nutters out of our mosque? Do something about them. You don't have to arrest them, but keep an eye on them and, maybe, break up what they're up to, because they are completely crazy. Well, it turned out that the whole thing is a sort of little cell being run by MI6. So, it's which, of course, who was sitting down with the CIA running Operation Cyclone and the $4 billion poured into that in Afghanistan back in the 1980s. So, this is quite clearly something which is the intelligence services have had a hand in, and we've just had over the last few months the two main people from Finsbury Park Mosque, that's Abu Hamza and Haroun Aswat, both of whom, mainly Haroun Aswat actually, were implicated in being the masterminds of the 7/7 London bombings, both been shipped over to you guys in America, so conveniently, if somebody wants to subpoena them here in Britain because they've killed their family, they can't. They have to get them back from America, but they've both been sent down in the US on a completely unrelated charge, even though both of them, particularly Haroun Aswat, he was phoning the four bombers, alleged bombers on the 7/7 London bombings in the week running up to the bombs. And most people looking at this from the outside would say this guy is the mastermind. Certainly he should have been tried, arrested, and yet no. I mean, he actually was released twice. I think it was in Pakistan and in Kenya, if I remember rightly, because he'd been travelling around the world because they knew that this guy was Haroun Aswat. He's one of the people who's main wanted people for the 7/7 bombings, and yet he got off scot-free. And he was released from both of those places. And then he was put in a mental hospital here in Britain under detention and then shipped to the United States. And so he's out of the loop. And this is the way they do it. The main people who should be being questioned by the courts get sort of spiraled out, and so they're nowhere near the right place, to actually bring them to justice. And the justice system is just beyond a joke. We had here in London a whole series of individual inquests for 52 dead people. Well, of course, there should have been a public inquiry. That's a traditionally good way of doing that sort of thing. And the families are just left feeling, well, what was that all about? And we still don't know what happened to our loved ones. And that's probably the thing that people, I could tell you now that people don't know about the 7/7 London bombings. I was talking to David Pratt up at the Scottish Sunday Herald in Glasgow. It's a really good paper, the Herald in Scotland. It's one of the only really independent papers in the whole of Britain, I would say. Other than the Independent in London is quite good. But David was telling me how the Israeli embassy, the day before the 7/7 bombings, had gone on to high terror alert. And yet it was supposed to be a surprise attack. Of course, Netanyahu was in London for the 7/7 bombings. and supposedly supposedly got a warning.
Yeah, they did.
One thing's for sure, he never left his hotel when he should have done that morning, and it was a surprise attack. So Netanyahu, and also the other side that a lot of people don't know about the London attacks, is the link with Verint Systems, this part of Converse Technologies, where the boss had absconded with $13 million and was the Securities and Exchange Commission were after him. But his company was trusted with security on the London Underground, if you can believe that. And they were the guys who had access to the tube tunnels for something like 5 months before the bombings. And so, you've got to ask questions about what is an Israeli security company, private security company, with a guy who's an explosives expert as its chief executive, Daniel Bodner, doing some sort of security job on the London Underground. I don't think most people on the Underground realise that that's even going on. So yes, the Israelis' fingerprints are all over this stuff, Patrick. You're absolutely right. But there is another aspect to it. You've got the US, the Israelis, and the Brits, and the upping the ante with this war crime drone war to sort of surpass anything that was possible from the CIA torture program, where we don't bother torturing anyone, we just knock them out and kill them.
Oh yeah, that's their policy. Yeah.
And then, of course, a couple of weeks ago there was another marriage, a marriage ceremony. Bang! Hellfire missiles raining down everywhere, and something like 35 people killed. A marriage ceremony, that's not really considered to be interesting or important because it's kind of normal. But if that was to happen in Paris, which it actually wasn't even as bad as that in Paris. The other thing to mention is the Germans also have a very important drone program, but it's all very, very covert. Yeah, so it's not just the Israelis, the Brits, and the Yanks that are doing this drone stuff. The Germans are playing their cards very close to their chest.
The Luftwaffe of the drone world.
Well, that's right. It's fascinating, isn't it? This story over the last week has made me laugh, actually, that you've got not enough. They can't recruit people to fly these drones.
Yeah.
Actually is wonderful, isn't it? There's nobody. And what they'll do, of course, is they'll just switch them onto computer control.
Well,
the computers will decide who to kill.
That's right. It's that was the big talking point from the defense industry before Christmas at one of the big conferences recently. And this was covered in Defense One. We spoke about this, I think, 2 weeks ago on the show. That they're saying, I think it's one of the main British DoD guys was one of the spokespeople. He said we need to identify why people do not want to, or what's keeping artificial intelligence, or what they call autonomy, from being implemented for the drones, and they're already working on it. DARPA's well advanced on this.
Well, maybe the people at DARPA should watch. I think it's called the Forbin Project, isn't it? It's a really good old 1970s feature film movie about this. I love this stuff because it's been predicted. Previous generations to us, Patrick, have said, "Look, watch out for this, guys." And I think what happens is the computers are allowed to start to fight this war, and what happens is they just take over and wipe everybody out. Yeah.
Well, the autonomy is, and this was intimated at one of the drone conferences at the Excel Center in London, where they showed the screen up with a number of red dots. So they had the red dots were the heat signatures, and then the orange dots were the potential terminate with extreme prejudice targets, and then the AI system on board, the autonomous brain, if you will, in the drone will decide to terminate which of those orange dots to terminate in which order, based on various algorithms, threats, inputs, data, or whatever. That this is the future of drones. It's not if, Tony. They're already presenting.
You have to say this is evil. It's not just bad technology. This is evil. It's back again. And I would reiterate, NATO was started, according to one of the top SS people, by the international supporters of the SS. That's Paul Hauser. Go look him up. He was running the SS Veterans Association. The other thing to say is there's a lot of history has attempted to really obscure the continuity between the looted billions of Europe. That is to say, the money that the Nazis looted from all the central banks and places like that, gold, securities, all that kind of stuff. And then they secreted it away for this underground Fourth Reich network, which is, I think, what we're dealing with today. But just to try and flesh that out a little bit, there are a couple of books, both of which are terrific reads. One is by a guy called John Ainsworth Davis, and under the pen name Christopher Crichton, and he was allegedly, anyway, involved in this raid by the Brits, by Ian Fleming, and signed off by Desmond Morton, Winston Churchill, and King George VI, to get Martin Bormann out from under the noses of the Russians in April 1945, commando raid. And that book is really well worth reading. I don't think it's ever been published in the US. It's called OpJB, Operation James Bond. And Ian Fleming, of course, the James Bond writer, he put a lot of stuff into his books because after the end of the war, of course, he'd signed the Official Secrets Act, Ian Fleming had, but he wanted to write about some of the stuff that they'd been doing in the war in fictional terms. And so that's well worth a read, the OpJB book by Christopher Crichton. The other one, though, is probably more interesting for you because it's the former CBS News correspondent Paul Manning. Paul Manning had been actually flying on bombing raids over occupied Europe with the Brits, with the Americans, and was reporting back for CBS during World War II. And his swan song was this book which came out in 1982 called Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile. And what he does there is he really puts together all of the various bits and pieces that prove that Martin Bormann did survive the war, and he spent his time in Paraguay and Argentina setting up 750 corporations. Mm-hmm. He was a real administrator, Hitler's number two, basically his treasurer. And in those corporations, once he'd set them up, all the ex-SS people, supporters of the Nazis, etc., took off their swastikas, put on nice suits, and marched off into the post-war world, industrial world. That's right, Hugo Boss suits. Yeah, that's the ones. And I know the thing is that Paul Manning, bless him, I mean, if you ever hear any of his reports, a just amazing guy, brilliant writer, he actually had his son shot dead the week that the book was published. And his publisher had his legs broken. So, you can see that there was a lot of people around that didn't want that book to come out. And there's been a real attempt to completely squash it out of history. But you can get it as a free PDF, I think. And also, there are ways of getting hold of the book still. But it's a terrific read. And it's also interesting, I found to see names in there that are still there in the Bilderberg conferences today, which I've covered over the years. And you can see that there is some kind of continuity, quite exactly what, difficult to tell, between the Bilderberg and the Nazis. And one person, really stands out is Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was an SS officer. He was the chairman of Bilderberg for the first 20 years of its existence until 1975, when he was discredited in the Lockheed scandal. And he'd taken $1 million bribe from Lockheed, and he had to step out the way. But Bernhard was died in the war Nazi and he denied it as well. He was saying,
he was an SS officer, wasn't he?
That's right. He was in the SS. He was in the Nazi Party when he was at university. But somehow he managed. He moved into married into the Dutch royal family, and he said, "Oh well, I'm going to be the Dutch liaison officer for the liberation of Holland." And so he was in there with the Brits, the Americans, in a RAF uniform as a Dutch liaison officer at the Operation Market Garden, Arnhem. The Bridge Too Far film. Mm-hmm. He was involved in all that, and he was trusted as a liaison officer, even though he was an ex-SS officer. Actually, the Americans were much more sensible. They didn't trust him at all. The Brits did, because they were told to by King George VI, and Ian Fleming talks about that too. But the amazing thing was that anybody trusted an ex-SS officer involved in, a massive British Army and American Army operation. So the Admiralty wouldn't let him, didn't trust him, but the Army did. And there are pictures of him actually looking over the shoulder of Monty, the Operation Market Garden. He sent a spy in to make connections with the Dutch resistance movement as a preparation for Market Garden and the liberation of Holland. And these 3 parachute divisions landed in a Bridge Too Far. And that guy turned out to be a Nazi agent. So, just a minute. There are some real big connections here. And, of course, that operation ended up as a disaster. It gave the Nazis an extra 6 months, basically, of war in order to finish their operation to to get rid of their money, to squirrel away their money for the Fourth Reich after the war, the Underground Reich, which is actually, Patrick, I think what we're dealing with today. And we go back to evil. The people who are running things are virtually a cult. And the only way they manage society is through the mainstream media. That's the way that the only kind of the closest that people can get to any kind of truth, because we're not living in a democracy at all. We're living in a world run by these people. They just want to require more and more resources, oil. Anyone that stands in their way, like the Syrians or the Russians, are just going to get smashed, it seems. And thankfully, there is a little bit of resistance to that by other powers, but also, of course, an increasingly aware population here in the West.
Yes. You will get smashed if you stand in the way of that. And just a couple of points. We'll go to break in a second, but when we come back, I want to talk about the messaging. I've been keeping track of the messaging as it's been doled out in real time. We're going to talk about the messaging which is being laid out here at the Paris attacks and how that fits into the bigger story. And then after that we'll come back to the Fourth Reich story, which is very real, very clear, and very present. The Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network. That's the ACRnetwork.com and 21stCenturyWire.com. And I'm here with my guest. Of course, we're talking about the Paris attacks and other bigger things and Operation Gladio. And we're talking with Tony Gosling, who's an investigative journalist from the United Kingdom, who's joined us for this very important conversation. And before we get back into pick up the thread which we just dropped, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things, Tony, that you said in the previous segment. One of them was about the terror mascots. We're coming back to the sort of Parisian frame here. The theme for today's show, by the way, if you're looking at 21stCenturyWire.com, is Semester Plan, Paris Terror. So we're getting into the master plan of the Paris attacks. Now, the terror mascot is very important. And you talked about Abu Hamza. We've also got Abu Qatada. Both of those are more or less admitted informants, even though the British intelligence denied it when commenting to the press about the Abu Hamza trial in the United States. It's pretty obvious that he was in regular contact with the British intelligence services, and Finsbury Park Mosque was a honeypot of sorts. Abu Qatada got a better deal. He got shipped off to Jordan, no time served or nothing, and he'll be coming back to the United Kingdom this year. So we're told. So another mascot. And so we have all these various what I call terror mascots. Now, I knew Abu Hamza was a mascot back in 2003. How did I know that? Well, during the anti-war marches, the Palestinian community was demonstrating. People from that community in London were demonstrating against the war. You'd expect they would anyway. And the people from Finsbury Park Mosque were coming up to the line of Palestinians when they were over at Regent's Park Mosque outside having a demo. And they said, it's haram. What you're doing is haram. This is on the eve of the Iraq War. What you're doing is haram. Now, this was told to me by one of the Palestinian students who I knew because he worked in the bakery that I live next door to in West London. And I said, that's weird. And he said, yeah. I said, are you sure? He said, yeah. And these were all Abu Hamza's foot soldiers. And I thought, well, he has to be, what's going on there in Finsbury Park, so, but of course, this is all gone over the heads of the media, as has the Sydney Sheikh, the Sheikh Monis, Haroon Monis in Sydney. That's gone over the heads of the media. He was a mascot as well, had a brilliant media presence. I mean, News Corporation milked Abu Hamza. I mean, he's one of the greatest all-time character actors in the history of this particular series of drama. But so now we have the creation of the myth in Paris, and we have the Bonnie and Clyde myth with the two Koulibaly and Hayat, his alleged girlfriend. photos were released of her in a veil with a crossbow, which we have on the site today, and also her with a fake gun or a paintball gun or something. You talked about the paintball sessions there. That's interesting. That's probably where those photos were taken. You have no way of confirming, Tony, whether this girlfriend is actually the girl in the photographs of the full burqa with the gun and the crossbow. You have no way of telling because you're covered, just like you have no way of telling the shooters are the same people they're putting up as the perps. The Kouachi brothers, you don't know. And in fact, the Kouachi brothers, if most, North African average build is usually quite short. They looked like they're maybe short and stocky. The shooters were 6'1", muscular, like soldiers, basically, and handling guns. And if you handling a real Kalashnikov is not like casting a fly fishing rod. Okay, those are heavy. They're just to work those guns, you have to be a certain stature, physical stature. You have to be strong. So there's a lot of these things that I'm looking at. I want you to comment on those, Tony. And also I want you to comment on, here are the talking points laid out by the media. They've all apparently agreed on these behind the scenes, that they'd lay these out on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. First talking point, which they circulated, this is France's 9/11. That's a quote from CNN. Solidarity with Charlie Hebdo in defiance to protect freedom of speech and democracy. And we need Muslim voices to condemn these horrible events. Where is the Muslim community? Do they share the same values as us? So it's an us and them narrative that's being portrayed here. And we have too many radical Muslims in the West within our midst, and we do not have enough money or resources to watch and follow and surveil all of them. What do we do? Oh, my God. What a crisis.
Well, I'll tell you what you do is you focus on the ones who are at the top of the terror watch list, as we had with the Lee Rigby killing here in Woolwich in London the year before last. That's 2013. The guys that did that killing, they were at the top of the terror watch list. And I think it's fair to say the same exact things happened last week in France. People right at the very top of the terror watch list, people who have been in jail, one of them anyway, in France for terrorism. Here in Britain, it was both the guys, and they were actually sprung from jail by the British intelligence services in order to carry out the Woolwich attack. It's quite clear that the heads must roll at the French security services, but heads won't roll. What will happen is they will get far more resources because of the way this whole thing has been handled by the press. So I see the press as really one of the cruelest actors in all of this, in that what they're doing is essentially providing cover for the real terrorists here. And the real terrorists are those that did not do their job. They did not do counterintelligence. They did not do the work of a security service should do. That is to make sure that Kalashnikovs and ammunition cannot fall into the hands of people at the top of the terror watch list who, for one reason or another, they have decided, that there's no way of keeping them in jail anymore because they haven't done anything wrong. So you've got a completely perverse situation here where the correct reaction to Wednesday's events, particularly Wednesday, and the attack on the magazine, should be heads rolling at the security services. Actually, what's happening is they're going to being given another massive, big, fat paycheck.
Yeah. And so, in fact, you're right. Amidi Coulibaly, as I was talking with Kurt Haskell in the first hour, he was in jail with one of the Karachi brothers, I think it was Sharif, in 2005 to 2006. They're both in prison together. They were both recorded and reported as being radicalized while in prison during that time. And then they were released. And at that time, Coulibaly then met with President Sarkozy. This is in the major French national newspaper, by the way, in a kind of jobs program, PR junket, as the face of the poor, downtrodden, disaffected youth who now has a job at the local Coca-Cola factory, blah, blah, blah. And then months later, the police swoop in on his flat with 240 cartridges of high-caliber ammunition, and photographs of him with one of France's most notorious terrorists. I think it's Bergal, and he then it goes back into prison. He is then sentenced to 5 years in 2013 for trying to spring this is a escape plot that he was a part of to spring Bergal. And also he's got affiliations with another armed Islamic top terrorist who tried to bomb the U.S. Embassy in 1990, or I forgot which year it was. I think it was 2010. But so he was on the U.S. terror watch list as well. I mean, anyone who's involved in trying to bomb a U.S. embassy, I'm sure is at the top of the pile, okay, not the bottom.
So certainly on the British no-fly list. I mean, we know that, don't we?
As well. That's the other one was on a no-fly list. So I think 2 out of the 3 were in prison. The other one was known to have traveled to Yemen, blah, blah, blah. So obviously one of those or someone within their midst, probably the girlfriend is the handler. If not, one of those is an informant, or these are all paper cutout characters because we haven't seen them. All we've seen is a few photographs.
That's another point, isn't it? Cutout characters. We don't know who these people were. If you notice with the coverage, one of the things I always listen for is when they drop the word alleged. The alleged terrorists such and such, and they start using the name, and they will always prefix it with the word alleged in the media. As soon as those guys are blown away by security forces, the word alleged disappears.
Yes,
say what you want.
Yeah, they speculate and this and that. So we've gone out on a limb and said that, well, we think that this is a kind of a cutout operation. There's a lot of staged aspects to this, which we pointed out at 21st Century Wire. And so other people in the mainstream attacking us, saying you're speculating, these are conspiracy theories and blah blah blah. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you there, madam. The worst conspiracy theories I've seen lately are coming from government and from the mainstream media. The wildest speculative theories. They do it every second. But if I speculate on the fact that this might be a false flag event or the intelligence services are intimately involved in this event, then that is somehow a conspiracy theory. No,
one of the most important aspects of all of this, of course, is this was nothing to do with free speech for the cartoonist at Charlie Hebdo. Back in 2009, an 80-year-old columnist on Charlie Hebdo was actually put on trial for something he said about Jean Sarkozy, Nicolas Sarkozy's son, about him converting to Judaism for financial reasons. Literally, that sentence was enough to put him on a criminal trial and to be sacked from Charlie Hebdo. This whole business of the anti-Muslim stuff, to me, is becoming obvious that this is just a copycat of the anti-Semitic stuff that the Nazis were peddling in the 1930s. Again and again, you see cartoons, horrific cartoons of the Jews at the time,
and the gypsies, and the gypsies.
Yeah, of course. In fact, everybody that wasn't an Aryan was a victim of the Nazi cartoons, and in its complete double standards. When the idea of one of the Charlie Hebdo characters, criticising the Jewish population in actually what is a very mild way, and being sacked for it and being put on trial for it, an 80-year-old guy.
And they made a public apology, Tony. They issued a public apology to the Jewish community or to whoever, I think Sarkozy or something, or the son, and so they totally bent backwards for that particular lobby, right? But they're putting this thing out about Charlie Hebdo lampoons everybody. They lampoon the Pope, they lampoon the Jewish community and the Muslims too. So that's equal opportunity thing, and it's not actually altogether true, Tony. Actually, if you look at what you just mentioned, plus a few other things.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me very much like the sort of Goebbels style propaganda that we're getting, even though, there isn't, you don't see the Goebbels as behind the scenes. They're there. There's a tremendous amount that people don't. I mean, I've worked in mainstream broadcasting. In fact, I was working on a station called Greater London Radio, which has a potential audience of around about 11 million, something like that. In Marylebone High Street we were based, and doing the news there. In the newsroom we had something like 12, 15 full-time reporters and journalists, and we were dealing with things like the IRA bomb attacks back in early 1990s. And, people don't realise that there are some rather nasty characters behind the scenes. The managers, the editors are not all nice characters. And, one of the things I'd just like, it's a simple thing. I'd like to see everybody involved in broadcasting in some way doing a bit of broadcasting themselves. Let's have a look. Can they actually do it? Because what was going on was people that couldn't do the broadcasting were being actually promoted off the air. The idea being that, oh, God, we've got somebody that's absolutely hopeless. They've got a contract to stay here. What we'll do is we'll put them in a management position. So, I was being managed by people who were absolutely incompetent, hopeless, and would never go 5 minutes with an audience anywhere. And that was actually pretty systematic right across. And of course, the closer you got to things like the BBC television newsroom, as it was in Shepherd's Bush then, the closer you got to the more powerful national parts of the BBC, the more these kind of creepy, spooky characters were hanging around. Sort of, it was very much like there wasn't actually a cigarette paper you could put between them and MI5, the security services, and the BBC board for many years had people like Daphne Parks, MI5 people on the board, actually sitting on making all the big decisions about what happens with the future of the corporation.
Well, David Shaler detailed in that book, Spies, Lies, and Whistleblowers, actual editors and sub-editors and producers on the payroll on various major newspapers and broadcast networks.
Yeah, and the other thing is, of course, there are a lot of people who are just friendly. They're agents of influence, they call them, with the security services, and it ends up actually, a sort of cancer eating away at the organisation's editorial independence. We, for example, one of the things that we were doing in the 90s, in the first Gulf War, was getting, we were just around the corner from quite a good part of the Iraqi community in London, and we got a couple of guys in there who were saying, oh, actually Saddam Hussein, he's a good guy, and we put him on the radio. God, there was a hell of a hoo-ha about it. But this is what you need balance, you need both sides. And the thing with Britain, I'm not really that au fait with the US, but certainly here we've got an incredible multicultural community. We can get views here in Bristol even from all over the world. We've got people from Algeria, from Somalia.
Oh, yeah, Bristol is like a microcosm of
the whole world.
Yeah, no,
it is. Yeah,
yeah. Bristol is like a fractal representation of the bigger picture, basically. If you don't know Bristol,
we did discover you.
Yeah.
John Cabot script by the Bristol Merchants. Well, of course, that's an insulting thing to say in some ways, of course, because Americans
that's true.
Discovered it.
No, that's true. And credit where credit's due. And if you talk about, credit where credit, then the Scottish will want in on this conversation.
There was no, listen, we don't want to take any credit for that because it was one of the most horrific tricks in history played by the Bristol Merchants. Basically, they went over there, they tracked the east coast of the US. They made contact with some of the North American Indian tribes, and then they tricked them one by one. They went in, they said, we want to be friends, and then they basically killed some of the key people in the tribe, started wars within each tribe. They were doing the whole divide and rule tactic, basically, what they did is they would identify in eeach of the Indian tribes who the key people were by being friendly with them, and then they would kill them. That's effectively. If any of your listeners who are in New England go to the Pequot Museum, I think it's at is it Foxwoods or something it's called? I was over there back about 2000 and saw a most amazing film which the Pequot Indians will only show to people that go to the museum. And the museum itself is brilliant. It's like the North American Indians' revenge.
Where's it located?
Yeah.
What town? What city?
Gambling. It's in Massachusetts somewhere. I think it's
Massachusetts,
Maine, maybe. We just went there for the day, but it's the North American Indians' revenge because it's a museum, a brilliant, historical museum, financed by gambling, right? And what happened was there was a little pizza place that the Indians had, and a lot of locals had driven to there and started using the slot machines, and they realised, wow, let's get some more slot machines. And so eventually they built a massive complex with two big hotels that's about a mile long, and you've got all these white Americans in there, mostly white anyway, pulling slot machines. Meanwhile, the Indians are having the life of Riley now, not the Native Americans. And they put a fantastic museum, and I'd really recommend anyone, in that part of the country to go, if you're over there, to go and have a look, because it's just one of the best museums I've ever seen. And also, the responsibility is ours as Brits from Bristol, and we're very much aware of that with the slave trade and all that kind of stuff, which is a really horrific history of something like 5-6 million people perishing on the trade across to the Caribbean from Africa, the triangular trade that was all run out of Bristol, a Templar port, by the way, as several others, London and the east of Scotland around near Edinburgh, and the Knights Templar really were the people that started all this, I suppose you could say, by being the world's first multinational corporation, the world's first international bankers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I want to get to. I still haven't been to Bristol, actually, believe it or not. I've been to every other town in Britain, but not Bristol. So that's on my list of things to do when I come back to the UK this summer, Tony. So hopefully I'll see you there. But listen, on this subject, however,
yeah. Sorry, we've got a little bit away in history there.
I want to get your opinion on this. This is something I picked up, Tony. And to me, there are no sacred cows in journalism. And by the way, what you said about the intelligence services penetrating into the media, Philip Graham from the Washington Post, one of the Graham family, when he was having a conversation with the CIA operative, and this was recorded in a very well-known book. I don't have the title in front of me, but he said it was cheaper to get a good journalist than it was a good call girl in Washington in the 80s. A couple of $100 a month, that's all that it required. That was back then. William Colby said the CIA owns everybody of any significance in the U.S. mainstream media. That was a quote, 1982. And I've got also Carl Bernstein said that the CIA have people in management positions in Time magazine, have done since the beginning. Okay. So, and I've actually run into a few of these people, although I didn't know if they were spooks specifically, but in Beirut, someone from Time magazine who I thought to me was very sketchy because seemed very disinterested in geopolitics and anything that was going on and more interested in chasing skirts. But he was of an Ivy League disposition. And that's their main recruiting ground, like Oxbridge in the UK is where the intelligence services will almost exclusively pull all of their operatives from Oxbridge. The same with the Ivy League, Brown University, Yale University, Princeton, in Columbia in the United States. So it does exist. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's real, and it only stands to reason. So we have a lot of lecturing about RT being a propaganda outlet of the Kremlin, but no talk about the mega propaganda operation, which is the BBC. Now, one of the sacred cows is there's certain heroes in journalism, Tony. One of them has been elevated to hero status. His name is Jeremy Scahill. He's an American who had an Oscar nomination for The Dirty War last year, and he played a role in this Paris attack, believe it or not. He came in at the very right time for CNN to provide the right piece of information. So in order to help shore up the Anwar al-Awlaki narrative, CNN quickly linked up with the famed Pentagon JSOC insider and editor of The Intercept, Jeremy Scahill, who then claimed on air live to have just spoken to his contact within Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or a liaison with AQAP, to be more specific, based in Yemen, who told Scahill that, yes, it's official, AQAP has taken ownership of the Paris attacks, in effect corroborating the mainstream's incredible narrative of the Paris attacks. So Scahill told CNN that the attacks were their revenge, quote, for the honor of the prophet, end of quote. And then Scahill goes on to say that AQAP will be releasing a longer, more detailed statement later today. Scahill goes on to validate what is already a widely accepted and bogus Al-Qaeda magazine, which many believe, including myself, is managed by the CIA, called Inspire, an English language, full-color, glossy magazine, allegedly published by Al-Qaeda. And then he's quoting it and even goes so far as to say the Inspire editors had inserted a picture of a French passport in a previous article, which Scahill claims is meant as a foreshadowing for the attack on Charlie Hebdo, end of quote. Scahill's breaking news which lands in CNN's lap at the very moment they need it to join the dots, happens to tie this whole thing neatly together for this whole proceeding. So according to Scahill, Tony, someone, his contact on the other end of a phone in Yemen, claims to have spoken to someone else on another phone who is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, who says, yes, we did it. And ostensibly that's just about enough for Washington war hawks and NATO hawks to base the rest of their foreign policy, torture policies, foreign interventions, etc., domestic security, budget upgrades. What a scoop by Jeremy Scahill. What do you think, Tony?
It's almost like reading from a script, isn't it? And I think that's the extent of the sophistication nowadays of these psychological warfare people behind the scenes. The people we don't actually see on TV. One of these days I'd love to see them swivel the camera around, to have a look at who's around the back of behind the camera, up in the gallery in the studio. I always remember. A Danish friend of mine, saying that he was watching the TV one evening. One of their sort of news presenters, who was actually quite well liked and respected. I mean, it's like our leaders, the newsreaders. I mean, certainly when I look at our newsreaders, very little respect for most of them. One or two, like Jon Snow on Channel 4 News, is pretty good. I mean, he's asking some of the questions we're asking, actually. But, if you were to swivel it around, you'd see some horrible types. Anyway, this guy, he said... he leant into the camera at the end of the evening's bulletin, and he said, and that was what we decided to tell you tonight, making absolutely clear that there were certain things that the editors were keeping from the newsreaders. And then of course, that is the sort of thing that we just don't get any kind of real relationship with. There is no expectation that someone like David Cameron might possibly be a man of integrity. It's the whole way that leadership works now, whether it's through news media or through and leadership of thought, that is, or political leadership through politicians, is here's a guy, they're out for what they can get, they're out for themselves. And that's the expectation now. There really isn't any kind of choice, like you can vote for, or you can switch to a channel where you might find somebody who's public-spirited, public-minded, and actually looking out for the viewers. It's really just another industry that's been taken over and owned. And over the centuries, I think probably it's fair to say the British started this capitalism business where you basically privatise everything. We started back in the medieval times, really, with slowly privatising the land. That is to say that the common land, the earth, is a free gift to mankind. Hang on, guys, this is for everybody. And slowly but surely in Britain here we were doing this thing called enclosure of land, privatisation of land, which was kicking the peasants off the land and the poor people and saying, well, actually, this is going to be a big farm run by me now. And that idea of privatisation, bringing common resources, things like water, the things that everybody needs, land, water, that kind of thing, into private hands. That is what I think that is the power elite are most afraid of losing. And that's the idea of doing something about that in communist and left-wing mentalities is actually the big thing that they fear, because they've set up for themselves a wonderful little system where they never have to work. They can go play golf, do what they want, fly around in their private jets, and they want to keep that system. That's really what this is all about. It's about selfishness, and they've figured out a pretty evil way of trying to extend their power right across the planet.
Okay, and I'm going to play you a clip as well. Okay, this is back to the central issue of Charlie Hebdo. I'm going to play you this clip. So, Brian, just give me a shout if you've got that. So this is back to Charlie Hebdo. Okay, now I just spoke to a publisher who's based in London. He's American, and he goes back and forth between Paris and London quite a bit over the years. I think he's retired now. And his reaction immediately was, he said, oh, my God, he said, they couldn't give that magazine away before this happened this week. He said,
well, that's right. They had a fundraising thing just around about Christmas time, and apparently they got no money in at all, so they're about to fold.
Yeah. They basically couldn't give it away. And now you've got, it's Brian, it's called Hebdo Million, if you've got that clip. Give me a shout if you got that. But go ahead and play that clip, Brian, if you've got it. Hebdo Million. This is millions of Charlie Hebdo magazines are going to be printed and sold over the next couple of days. And already some of the other special issues, the ones in question anyway with the Prophet, are already circulating on eBay for hundreds of pounds per issue. Okay.
Listen, I want to interject though quickly before you play your clip, if you don't mind, Patrick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to say that there was none of the mainstream main media newspapers in Britain have printed these cartoons, which is really good to see. I think maybe one of the Murdoch ones or a couple of the Murdoch ones did, but all of the serious mainstream newspapers have taken a really good attitude, I think, which is, yes, we're standing in solidarity with the journalists and with journalism generally, but no, we're not going to print these inflammatory, provocative cartoons. Thank you very much.
No, it's true. And, you know, I struggled with this for about a minute, okay? I went to look and I thought, I've got to put these cartoons. When this first happened, I thought, because I'm doing journalism, because I've got to show everything to put the story together, I've got to actually put the images in question up in the articles here. So Tony, what I did is I went through the Charlie Hebdo archive, and I looked at some of these issues, not just the ones with the Prophet, but the other ones too. And it was just vile and disgusting. And I thought, I can't. So for me, not putting it up is not because I was afraid that I was going to get attacked by ISIS, or to be on ISIS's hit list, or the the security services fake hit list, masquerading as ISIS. This was another problem with this whole thing, but it's because of an issue of taste. Okay, I thought they were just worthless. Okay, and this is me talking, Tony. I have a degree in art and design. I was a talented artist when I was younger, in galleries. I did a lot of illustration too, and for magazines as well when I was in my early 20s. So I was pretty good, and I used my talent. I couldn't make stuff like that with my talent. Okay, so I see these as it's sad what happened, and it's a crime, and it doesn't make anything right about it. However, the Charlie Hebdo, free speech is free speech, Tony, but it's like I can come up and insult you, but the minute you punch me in the nose, okay, that is basically, what happens to me. Free speech still exists. It's still out there, but you will get blowback if you go intentionally antagonize people constantly and be nasty and vile and disgusing and insult them and try to find the way to, insult them the worst possible way.
There is no free speech in the NATO countries, really. You've got we can stand on the corner and talk. Yeah. The most important thing, of course, is that there is no real right to be heard. Many views are completely shut out. Like I wonder if Charlie Hebdo, their cartoonists did there was when we had all this, when we still have, of course, with Bashar Assad. Bashar Assad, to me, is a cartoon character in the fighting ring, and he's put Obama on the floor. He's put Cameron on the floor. He's a kind of boxing character, from a cartoon. I haven't seen that one in Charlie Hebdo.
No. And they're very selective in what they do lampoon. And to me, it's Charlie Hebdo, that type of a style. It's a childlike look at politics, or it's taking sophisticated, complex things and themes and then boiling it down to a sort of a childlike view, in much the way that entertainment news with Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert, that most Americans, millennials and yuppies, will get their news from those two guys.
They're militant atheists is basically what they were. Yeah. And what they were doing was really adopting a kind of militant atheist religion. That was the irony of it.
Yeah, and that's kind of, you're seeing the expression of that with Charlie Hebdo. So, it's a bit narcissistic, that kind of, libertine, and all these aging Lotharios who probably are spending a lot of time down, guzzling booze down in the bar, which is nothing uncommon in France. But, if I walked in there and I wanted to have a talk with these guys, they would spit on me. I'm telling you, because, you're lucky to get any kind of a polite reception in Paris, but these are some of the most arrogant people. And this is not making light of any of the deceased, if they are in fact have gone that way. I'm just saying the facts, okay? That you look at the product they produce, and that gives you a sort of a idea of what's in their heads, what they're about. And to me, it's not all about. This is not a debate just about free speech. This is much bigger. It's also about if you want to get into decency, you want to get into civility. You want to talk about taste. These are all issues because I can't put pornographic images. Why doesn't the Guardian run porno on the front page? Why doesn't the Independent run porno? Because it's an issue of taste. They know that is for a certain filthy part of the newsstand, like the Daily, the People, or Rupert Murdoch still objectifies women on page 3. And it's 2014, and they still wants to call that a newspaper. That's a conversation that is definitely a part of this. So it's not strictly hey, we need to protect our free speech thing, because I see that as I see them as agent provocateurs, Tony. I'm sorry, that's very unpopular for some people, but they themselves acting as agent provocateurs, and they got a reaction. It was a horrible reaction.
But I think some of the detail here is in a way a distraction from the much bigger stuff to do with basically NATO running things, the Bilderbergers being a kind of politician management organisation for NATO, where you've got the bankers sitting in there, and these are the people who run. Which is one of the questions we don't get on our news media enough. Who's in charge? I can tell you who's in charge. NATO's in charge. NATO are the biggest bullies on the planet, and they have the nuclear weaponry to go with it, and also the banksters and the Bilderbergers with royalty backing them, and obviously the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds in the banking backing them. These guys actually do run things now. What we've got, particularly in Europe, is we've got a European Union which has subsumed most of Europe, which is run out of Brussels. It's run by a bunch of unelected people called the European Commission, who are basically the European government. The policy comes from us? No, of course not. It comes from something called the European Roundtable of Industrialists, and anybody who had any thoughts that the United States was in any way separate to the European Union needs to look at the corporations that run both of them. They also need to look at the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is coming along now, which effectively makes democracy abolished. It abolishes democracy, and this is the reality of what happened.
The TTP, right?
Transatlantic, the TTIP, Transatlantic Trade.
TTIP, and then the Pacific equivalent is the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
What they're doing basically is they've created the United States of America, and since World War II, they've been building up this thing called the United States of Europe, because you have a handful of people who are all part of this, sort of Fourth Reich cult, the people at the very top, and the only way you get to the top is being compromised and doing what you're told and being pliable, not by your merits, of course. You're going to get exactly the same thing, and it's coming in slowly. In Europe too, and it's one of those things. I very much doubt whether the Greeks are going to actually exit after the election, because they will do everything they can to stop the Greeks going back to the drachma. And you see what I'm saying here is that actually there is a much, much bigger whole loads of layers of power which are not being examined and not being looked at, and are actually the real agenda behind bringing the French to heel over their questioning whether they should get involved in these big NATO coalition, and also, of course, with the sanctions against Russia. I mean, we haven't mentioned Ukraine, but
speaking of NATO,
that is a absolutely horrific situation you've got there. Now we've got not only the fascists with the Sloboda, we've also got the Nazi party, that is the pro-Nazi party. You had a nice big rally over Christmas about the Nazi Stefan Bandera, and they are in the government. Private sector are. So, we've got Did you happen to catch this week my friend and yours, Arseny Yatsenyuk, basically was with Chancellor Merkel. That's right.
And he said that, I quote, And I don't know whether he was doing this, Tony. This was not a gaffe. It was not a gaffe. It was
a provocation.
It was an insult. Yeah, he said nobody has the right to rewrite the results of the Second World War. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is trying to do exactly this. We all remember how USSR invaded Germany and the Ukraine during World War II. We need to avoid the repeat of this. Okay, this is one of the most outlandish statements from to be generous, a neo-Nazi sympathizer, but to be accurate, a proto-fascist. Who is backed by the EU, backed by Catherine Ashton, backed by Victoria Nuland, the U.S. State Department, and the whole gaggle of globalists from David Cameron to William Hague to everybody else has backed this character and the people that he aligns himself with and represents as the what can only be described as a junta in Kiev.
Yeah, and of course they are completely lawless. Let's just look at the what happened with the MH17 airliner. 300-400 people killed. It looks almost certain now that the Ukrainian Kiev government was in some way involved in that, probably with the backing of NATO. Difficult to know about that, but
the black boxes are in Farnborough, Tony.
Well, a few. Well, it's impossible to know what's going on with those, then, isn't it? Malaysians should have them, surely.
Tony, when the AirAsia thing went down, they said, the media said, well, we'll find out how long will it take to get the data and the voice information from the black boxes. They said minutes, maybe hour maximum. And here we are, how many months later after MH17, and they've been sitting on these boxes in Farnborough. They handed them over to the British, and what? Have we got anything? Is it classified? Have you heard anything on this?
Nothing at all. Of course, that's the wrong story. That's what they used to say to us at the BBC. That's we were, for example, a couple of us were working on something to do with homelessness. That's the wrong story. Yeah, and that was the end of the story from the editors, the people that never dared to go on the television or radio themselves. So actually, of course, it's the right story, and we should know what's happened. But it's just like the Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq War, which was sitting, I think it was the year before, in 2009, before a general election here. We had an inquiry into what really happened between Bush and Blair and the reasons that they went to Iraq. That still has not been published. In fact, we've had in our the House of Commons last week, Prime Minister's questions came up twice. What happened to Chilcot? There's 1,000 things that have been kicked into the long grass right now by the criminal elite. And the other thing, of course, is the child sexual abuse and murder scandal connecting very closely with the Tory party, Whitehall and Westminster here, which it seems has been going on for decades and been constantly covered up by the good old Metropolitan Police and Scotland Yard. And that is the whole process of political blackmail is partly why we're in this situation where we are, with politics completely hamstrung, and basically the press really seem to be running the country most of the time. But look, there's a couple of things we were talking about Ukraine just to pick up on, because that to me seems to be what this Ukraine business is all about, is to basically weld, and of course the French thing from last week, to weld the Europeans, as the Bilderbergs have been doing ever since the end of World War II, into US foreign policy together as one giant superstate. So they're trying to keep everyone together. Actually, what you've got is this kind of forced a federation of countries that none of which want war with Russia, but you're in a federation that does, so you're going to have to go along with it, and it's all top-down kind of command structures that are being imposed. So the reason for the Malaysian business, I think many people haven't picked up on, which is the Malaysian government seems to be one of the only ones in the world that's actually got a proper rule of law, because they've taken Bush and Blair and I think it's Zippy Livni and various Israelis to court and found them guilty in Malaysia, and they do take the whole idea of international law seriously. So they've been given a slap. One of their airliners full of people stolen, and the other one sent down from 40,000 feet by it looks like a Kiev fascist fighter jet missile.
Yeah, it could be many number of aircrafts that have the potential to do that. But that's what the Russians had all their satellite data, which they released immediately, and that was all fell on silent ears at the time because, of course, as you said, Tony, that's the wrong story. The story that they wanted was to blame it on the Russian rebels using a book SAM system, which we find out that, well, they probably didn't have that, but yes, the Ukrainian army did, and then we have a situation, it's an ethnic cleansing type situation, which we're seeing in the east of the Ukraine. That is all being backed by NATO, I'm sure. Well, NATO intelligence, when we're talking about Operation Gladio, Tony, NATO intelligence, we're talking about Poland, we're talking about these Banderites. They've been grooming these groups since after the Second World War, and they just activated them basically last year. So, and this is NATO intelligence at work, isn't it?
Pretty certain it is. But yeah, I mean, so we're living in a world where the news media doesn't paint any of this. I mean, what about AFRICOM, for example? I mean, this has been a massive change really over the last 20, 30 years or so. Is that these various US command bases around the world. Most of what's been going on in Africa, for example, things like the conflict in Mali that the French have got involved with, and obviously lots of stuff to do with the Arab Spring in Tunisia, where there were certain people assassinated just as it looked as if there was going to be some kind of real democracy breaking out in Tunisia, which was the first country in the Arab Spring. Obviously, the horrific situation now in Egypt, where you've got thousands of people who are basically should be in government, instead in jail. You've got thousands of political prisoners in Egypt. You've got thousands in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, massive amounts of political prisoners, all amongst our so-called allies. And these operations, many of them have been run out of this thing called AFRICOM, which is based in Stuttgart in Germany. Mm-hmm. And just amazing that I've never seen any coverage of who AFRICOM are. They've got a massive budget. It's one of those sort of things that works jointly with NATO as well. Massive bureaucracy. And they are basically the modern version of the old colonial powers, were in fact probably far worse because of all the high-tech stuff involved. So, why haven't we been told about things like that? I mean, there's vast amounts of our money going towards it. And this is, of course, the irony of all of the Charlie Hebdo stuff in France, the 7/7 London bombings, is that much of the arrangement, or many of the arrangements that have gone into these things in previous years, that is to say MI6 being involved with Finsbury Park Mosque, these guys, the Karachi brothers in Paris, looks like lots and lots of public money has been spent, our tax dollars, our tax pounds been spent on getting them into the position where they can then be run out for one of these big attacks. Yeah.
And, just quickly on AFRICOM, I remember downloading one of their PDF documents during the run-up to the Libyan war in 2011, and I was reading it, and it said there in print, they've since taken this paper down, but this was off AFRICOM's website, and they have a number of things up there that you can go see, to evict or neutralize Chinese influence on the continent in this next century. And that is one of the key objectives of AFRICOM. They're saying it's in their own sort of words. But yes, Africa is the new Middle East. That's definitely a trend that we're putting up there to keep an eye on in this year especially. I mean, we've got, I think, U.S. have troops and personnel stationed in 26 countries in Africa. By our count right now. So that is maybe underestimated, but a lot of people say that's underestimated. So they're everywhere, basically, just about every place. And so we're going to see a lot more conflict there. But Tony, the security state, this is one of the ironies of the security state, which is this top secret clearance culture where people can't talk about cases. Obviously, you've got the Official Secrets Act. You've got the Espionage Act in America. You've got D notices in the media. And so anybody involved in any kind of managing informants or, dealing or working with so-called informants, that's all classified.
Yeah, but hang on a second, because there's nothing to stop any of those people writing fiction. And
you're right.
This is what Ian Fleming.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had one of the Bond films on national TV here this afternoon. I had it sort of on the background with some of the images. It's quite flashing past. But what they did, people like him and Dennis Wheatley, the novelist, what they did is they put into cinematic form or into novel form much of what they've seen about how things really work, yeah. And I think probably for me the best Bond is on Her Majesty's Secret Service, where what they're doing is basically the government, the British government and MI6 have caved in to this guy who's paid by Telly Savalas, who's holding the whole world to ransom with some kind of Terminator technology that's going to wreck agriculture, and the government's all cave into him. So Bond decides he's going to take the whole thing into his own hands, and I'm not having this.
Who plays Bond in that one, Tony?
Oh gosh, George Lazenby, I think.
Oh, he went on to go on American soap operas. I think he still plays on The Young and the Restless, I think.
Yeah, but the point being that out in GoldenEye, I think he was out in the Bahamas. Good old Ian Fleming. He was making sure, he's saying, look, it's now payback time for these evil scumbags that were running Britain as well. Of course, we had King Edward VIII, who had abdicated, who was a Nazi, most definitely, and he was going out with this Nazi spy, Mrs. Simpson. And they even tried, in fact, John Loftus told us, they even tried to get into Nazi Germany in 1939 across the lines. They were arrested by, this is the former king was arrested by MI6 saying, no, you're not going to Nazi Germany, ex-king. And that's why they sent him off to the Caribbean, because he was trying actively to actually get into Nazi Germany to go and do propaganda broadcasts for the Nazis. This is the British king. So there was a big, and there still is, of course, a pro-Nazi type of organisations and an elite in Britain. Prince Charles, for example, his Leon Krier is one of his favourite architects, and Krier is the guy who's done the biography and a big fan of the big Nazi architect. I think, is it Speer, Albert Speer?
Albert Speer, the architect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
And back in Nuremberg, of course, the German government are just spending millions and millions of euros in re-establishing and restoring the Nuremberg rally site. There's all sorts of crazy stuff goes on around this, but there was certainly a very strong Nazi element, pro-Nazi element in Britain, which had to be squashed. In fact, the founder of the BBC, Lord Reith, he was the first ever Director General of the BBC. He was very pro-Nazi. Let many statements from him talking about what a wonderful job Hitler was doing. And he actively kept Winston Churchill off the airwaves. He banned him from the BBC's radio programmes back in the 1930s. And it was only by sacking the Director General of the BBC that the government could actually allow the anti-Nazi voices in the late 1930s to be heard to the national public. People like Churchill had been banned from the airways.
Well, that's where the money was. That's where the power was emerging at that time in the 1930s. So there's a kind of sycophantic cozying up to what's the next big thing. Well, it's it's Hitler in Germany, and so you had lots of people actively promoting that what was going on there, and the United States as well.
And then also in Whitehall, one of the key people was this novelist Dennis Wheatley. He was the main deception planner. He'd written basically for the War Cabinet a paper on the German invasion of Britain, because people here were rather worried, obviously, with German troops massing on the border during the Battle of Britain, etc., over in France. Threatening to invade Britain, and Wheatley put together a paper which was predicting how the Nazis would try and invade, so that they could do countermeasures here to make sure to make it difficult and unlikely as possible that they would ever succeed in doing that. And he was so his paper was so well received at the War Cabinet that they made him a squadron leader and brought him in as a deception planner right through the rest of the war. He was one of the most important characters running the war from a sort of psychological warfare point of view. But after the war, of course, he'd signed the Official Secrets Act just like as Ian Fleming had. He almost never stopped writing. I mean, he had a whole series of books, the Gregory Salas novels, which went into all sorts of fascinating detail about, for example, how the Nazis successfully invaded Norway by sending years beforehand women in to seduce some of the key people who were sort of at the helm of the Norwegian state. For example, the king, the court, the military, all this kind of stuff, which of course you see play out in the novels as well as this. What he does is in a wonderful way. He's writing a historical novel where he's weaving in little bits of truth. Not only that, he's one of the finest writers in the English language.
Yeah. So sending Herr Fräuleins into Norway to soften up the key people. That's always been the favored.
Well, that's right. The
technique.
Gregory Salas novels take you right the way through the war, really, and give you some real insight into using fictional characters, not necessarily the real names, of course, what really went on. Then after the war, he's writing this stuff, but he also wrote what is considered one of the great occult novels of the 20th century, which is called The Devil Rides Out, which really looks at the kind of black magic recruitment processes, this kind of thing, in sort of the expensive districts of London, and how it all actually works. How do you actually compromise people? How do you actually get them to give up their humanity and go on some kind of crazy power crusade? And he sort of illustrates that all really rather well, and that was made into a film by Hammer many years ago as well. It's one of the finest films. I'm sure if any of your audience have heard it, then they all know it, because it's one of those films you don't ever forget.
What's the title of that film again, Tony?
It's called The Devil Rides Out.
The Devil Rides
really
Out.
takes you through the way that sort of innocents are drawn into these occult circles and then kind of compromised, and they try and do something about it, and then they find they're thwarted. It's just a terrific explanation of the sort of things that seduce people into those, the very human failings that are played on by these occult groups to draw people in, to basically con them. And things like Freemasonry, that kind of stuff is another recruitment angle. But let's not mince words here, Patrick. Freemasonry, when you get into the third degree, you are being threatened with death if you breathe a word about what's going on. So you're dealing with a cult, and this is a very pernicious, very, very pernicious system, which actually fosters the ability for people in small covens or in small lodges to actually get away with criminal acts, and they know that everybody who's surrounding them is also sworn to secrecy. And I mean, certainly the way I see things in Britain, it's that sort of person that is being recruited by the elite and is starting to be has been promoted up through the system into many of the key positions of power today.
So, Tony, by extension, by what you just said about the cult aspect of, let's say, a secret society like Freemasonry, that would you say that could be, you can extend that by extension, that same sort of cult structure? You've got a culture of secrecy. So that same system is the architecture of the security services in this onion-like layers of secrecy, and it's kind of like, how do you get seduced into that lifestyle? Is that like a cult as well?
Well, I mean, first of all, one of the most seductive things about it all is that it's almost like sort of unlimited cash, and unlimited time. I mean, I once went up to one of the big Masonic halls, just happened to have a bit of time up in Edinburgh, and I got asked to join the Freemasons by some people up there, and you got this idea that they've got all the time in the world and they're the loveliest, friendliest people, and all you have to do is just kind of get involved, and there's none of the sort of anxiety, I suppose, of ordinary life, of having to earn a living, sort of 9 to 5, that kind of thing is nowhere. This is a sort of another world you're being invited into, where everything is sorted out for you. If you want a drink, play a round of golf. It's all about making life as easy as possible and using money to oil the wheels of that. And that's, I suppose, what is one of the roots of the problems of that we've got today, is that because of all of this austerity, because of the criminal elite actually making sure that most people don't have enough to live on, they're grinding them into debt. As William Cooper famously said, a system of eternal oppressive debt chained to a computer for the rest of your life. And when you're in that sort of situation, then any way out of it is very, very seductive. And that's what they offer. This is a way out of the grind, a way out of the misery. And many, many people fall for it. And what they don't realise necessarily is that the Masonic rituals take you further and further into this position where you are actually, you've got a noose around your neck, you've got a hood over your head, you've got a sharp dagger against your bare chest. All this kind of stuff is very obvious. It should be anyway. It's a threat of death. If you do anything to cross us, you're dead.
Yeah. And, the irony of it as well is these institutions are more vulnerable to internal corruption from within and from without because of that very system of secrecy that's been constructed. And that's the glaring irony of the whole thing. I think that's lost even on the participants or the members.
Well, that's right. I mean, in a way, there's no difference between someone who's sworn these oaths and anybody else. It's actually much, much easier than they would think to step away from it. But it's the fear. And, of course, fear is the most powerful weapon. I mean, that's what we've seen in France, going back to the present sort of news situation. Is what we've seen in France last week is fear on a massive scale. You've got people thinking, I can just walk down the streets of Paris. Suddenly, no, you can't. Is there going to be some guy in black around the corner? Is he friendly? Is he a policeman? Is he going to help you? Is he there to help you, or is he going to kill you? Suddenly, you've got mass fear. And I go back at what I was saying about Naomi Klein again, Patrick, because she has really spelt this out like nobody else in the shock doctrine. I think made it absolutely clear that this is being used basically to farm and manage people like herds.
Yeah, Naomi Klein. The book is The Shock Doctrine. That is a good seminal piece of literature that you could take what she talks about in that book and plug it into a lot of different scenarios and the things that we're describing here. So definitely on your book list if you haven't already got it. But we're going to wrap up in a minute, Tony. But we've covered a lot of the important aspects of this, and we've touched on things, to be honest.
There's one other thing I'd like to just mention, and that is the whole sort of the French-US relationship and the Eiffel Tower, this kind of thing, and also the French Revolution, the French Republic. They were doing something there which they thought was wonderful. If you want to delve into the real perpetrators of the French Revolution, you do have to actually go back to the Knights Templar, because 1307 they were all arrested by the French King Philip the Fair, and for many people, including Dennis Wheatley and others that have looked into all this stuff, it looks as if it's pretty clear that they were keeping a grudge, and that the French Revolution was a way of actually killing on the guillotine, murdering everybody who was a descendant of that French king, right the way throughout the aristocracy. And they were all identified, all notes were kept of who they were, and then they were all murdered by the successors of the Templars, because, of course, the Templars weren't squashed by the French king. They just had to go underground. They popped up in all sorts of places elsewhere. They also got a warning that they were going to be arrested by the French king. This is where, of course, the whole legend about the superstitions around Friday the 13th come from, because they were the French king arrested the Templars on Friday the 13th of October, 1307. And the French Revolution was actually organised through the Grand Orient lodges of Freemasonry in France. And this is all, if people don't believe me or want to get into some of this, the best book is that old John Robison book from the late 1700s, The Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe. And he himself was a Freemason, Robison, a fantastic writer, the inventor of the siren, the first guy to actually do a kind of air raid siren style thing back in the late 1700s, close friend of James Watt, the inventor of the steam engine, and the secretary of the Royal Society in Edinburgh, a very, very brilliant writer. And his book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, goes into the real origins of the French Revolution, who was really behind it, the secret societies that organised it. And also he goes into the origins of this group, the Illuminati, which is so... many people say, oh, there's no such thing. Well, hang on a minute. There may be no such thing now, but there certainly was in the late 1700s, and Robeson documented it very, very thoroughly with his book, Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments in Europe, which I think, is one of those basic things, a bit of history that I don't care about kings and queens, learning about that, or previous presidents. Get stuck into one of the books about real history, the Proofs of a Conspiracy. Also, those other books I mentioned earlier on, these are all good stuff. The Op JB by Christopher Crichton, and also Paul Manning's book, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile. Then you get an idea of why we are where we are today and what we're dealing with. Because if you don't know what you're dealing with, you've no idea what to do about it.
Yeah. Martin Bormann. We could do a whole show on him. One of the most fascinating characters, the administrative brains behind the Third Reich, and also, but this is a little bit of trivia. The whole concept, like celebrities today license their image on things, and David Beckham and whatever, Michael Jackson get paid royalties for that. Well, Bormann designed the exact same system with Hitler. On the coins and other iconic things. That was Martin Bormann dreamt that system up.
That's amazing. I mean, he was a rival with Rudolf Hess during the Second World War, and he even managed. He was a bit of a sneaky character. He managed to get Hess out of the way on that amazing flight to Britain. I think it was one in a Messerschmitt where he dropped in Scotland. Yep. Of course, what was happening there was he was just getting him out of the way, but Hess thought he was going over to do some secret negotiations with the Brits to come in with the Germans, the Nazis, against the Russians. So Hess was completely conned by Bormann into being got right out of the way, so that Bormann then had complete control of Hitler.
Yeah, and that's a comical, tragic story, the Hess story as well. I think he was roughing it on a farm, ends up getting caught. And what happened to him in the end? Did he die in prison, or was he sent back to Germany?
In Spandau jail in Germany. But one of the other sides to that was that one of the people that hated Bormann more than anyone else was Hermann Goering. And of course, he was one of the first people to be hanged at Nuremberg. And according to Christopher Crichton's book, John Ainsworth Davis's book, Op JB, Bormann was actually sitting in there incognito, in disguise, in the Nuremberg trials, watching all this going on, of certain parts of it, particular parts of it. I mean, I'm not sure if I believe it 100%, but certainly if you put that book together with the Manning book, what you've got yourself there is an absolute timeline of looted money from World War II being used to start a Fourth Reich, financial Reich, where you don't need tank divisions. You've got big corporations to do that for you, to take over, to smash the opposition.
Yeah, the new world order is a corporate order, and we talked about TPP and also the transatlantic part of that, and that is the new world order. It's a corporate world order. That's the way I see it, anyway. But Tony, fascinating conversation. We didn't do justice to most of the areas, but we did skim over quite a few things. I know that we could talk for hours about specific aspects of some of the things that we've mentioned.
I mean, I think one thing really important to say about the Charlie Hebdo and the France is don't get bogged down by the details. See the bigger picture. Zoom out, stand on the moon or something, look down on France and see how this is actually changing the entire French approach to whether they're an independent country or whether they've got to step into line with NATO.
Yeah, and it's not over. There'll be a right-wing counter-reaction, maybe a violent event that will cause shock and horror, then another Islamic terror event to reciprocate to that. So this cycle, this spin-dry cycle that we're in, is not over. It's going to continue, and people need to be aware of what's going on and how it's also affecting public opinion.
The French Republic is something, there's some good aspects of the French Revolution, the French Republic, some positive things about it, but, people forget things like the Dreyfus affair back in the 1800s, where this was basically the new French Republic, which was run essentially by an atheistic, fairly moderate atheistic group. getting straight into anti-Semitism. Basically, the Dreyfus affair was where there's an army officer, Jewish army officer, who was completely fitted up and sent to Devil's Island, and it was a massive hoo-ha about it. But there are some really nasty aspects to the militant atheism that we've seen from some of the elements within the French Republic over the years, and that, of course, is all inspired by Freemasonry, by the Grand Orient Lodges, and, Robeson, anyway, where he's still alive, would argue the Illuminati.
Yeah, well, it would be interesting to know. I'm not being overly speculative, but we will never know the memberships or affiliations of the victims of this week's tragedy. But certainly that would be of interest if I was investigating. But hey, I'm not on the Metropolitan Police Force in Paris, so I won't be investigating. I'll be doing it from afar, but we'll be doing the best we can. And certainly, Tony, you do the best you can on this and many other important issues. And our listeners appreciate very much the work you do and your time that you've given us this week.
Well, thanks very much, Patrick, for having me on. It's most privilege, actually.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Thanks, Tony. I really appreciate it, and good luck with what you're doing. I hope this isn't the last time we speak. I'd like to do a whole.
I might just remind you, listeners, about we do a show every Friday evening here with old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers and I, taking some of this stuff apart on Bristol Community Radio. And where there you can have a listen to podcasts if you want, or listen live as I did when I was actually over in, not listening to myself, but by the guy who's standing into me over in, other parts of the world. You can hear it. People were listening to it in Paris on Friday, for example, at the web address is thisweek.org.uk.
And also your website, Bilderberg.org. You can get links to your show there as well. That's right. And all sorts of history about the Bilderbergers and the links to the Nazis. I love the website, by the way, Tony. It's so Netscape. It's like awesome. It's ancient, isn't it? I love it. The thing I love about that, and it sounds crazy, but it's actually, if you're sitting in Africa on a rubbishy old computer on an old dial-up system, you can still read my website. You won't be able to read the BBC website or any of the modern websites, but you can still read those old sites. It's, it was written, I think it was in 1995, 96. That's pure HTML code, yeah? It's easy to read. It was a WYSIWYG editor I was using, but it's actually very easy for the most simple computers to read it. So, I don't like all this modern snazzy stuff where your page fills up with great big flash, blobby, great bloatware, I call it. Yeah, well, I like the old school. I like the old school stuff because I know it's more robust. It's gonna. I like to think it's about the content. It's not about the way it's presented. It's about what you're actually getting your teeth into. And there's plenty there for people to learn about. Almost relearn history, because there's a tremendous amount of stuff we don't know about what happened, particularly after World War II. And the Bilderberg, starting in 1954 in Oosterbeek in Holland, which is where they got their name from, the Bilderberg Hotel, running right up to this day, are the people that really run the Western world. Yeah, and that's what day is your show weekly, Tony? It's on Fridays. It's on Fridays here. I'm not sure what time it is over there, but it's drive time here as everyone's driving home on a Friday evening in Bristol. Okay, so that'll be about 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then sort of 5-6 p.m. British time, right? That's fine. Yeah. Yeah. All right, Patrick. Great to talk to you. There he is, Tony Gosling, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about a lot of things, the Paris attacks, and, of course, Operation Gladio, some bigger themes, culture of secrecy, the security state, the new corporate order. Those are all the subjects we covered today. What a fascinating conversation. This is not over. This conversation is not over. The big take-home, of course, is the PSYOP stuff, isn't it, really? The way that the military, psychological warfare officers are snapped up by these big organisations, that are basically like strategic communication labs that tap them on the shoulder and say, how would you like to earn 10 times more than you're earning for the military? Come and work for us, guys. Yeah, all the money for nothing and your chicks for free, as Dire Straits said, but Mark Knopfler. But that's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's what we're dealing with, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll be back next week, probably on this same subject. I've got a number of new articles coming up on 21st Century Wire, which you'll be able to get into a little more detail about some of these aspects, and with lots of links and references that you can go and drill in research for yourself. But thank you very much for joining us. Obviously, if you're watching CNN, you want to pop a few more tranquilizers. And if you're watching the BBC, you want to be fully sedated. for that experience, and I wish you the best of luck. But we're trying to give it to you stripped down and raw here as best we can.
Well, thank God most of our young people don't buy it, do they, Patrick? Most of them getting their news or from all sorts of alternative sources nowadays.
Yeah, and 3.7 billion in license fees is not enough, according to Andrew Neil, to get decent graphics for his program. So everyone has to suffer in these days of austerity. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. This is the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We will be back here same time next week, same place. And thank you so much for spending your Sunday with us. And if you missed this show, you can get the recording up on iTunes, Stitcher, and we'll have all the podcasts links ready for you. So take care. This is Patrick Henningsen signing out.